pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, May 19th, 2022. I am Kevin Laramie and I'll be joined by Duane Rollins in a second. We'll invite you to subscribe to our YouTube page and click on that notification bell to join us in our journey to 1,000 subscribers. We're more than halfway there, trekking along the way. And of course, if you like this podcast and you want to subscribe, you can subscribe everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, everywhere we are. This show is Duane. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. I was thinking of cashing out all my crypto today and cashing it and going to do a big vacation with it. Do you think that's a good? Oh wait, is it what? Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It's crypt. Oh no. Yeah. I'm glad I did not go into that train. It's like NFT. I was like, why? No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm not gonna put my life savings into this.
Yeah. Save your @sneeze bros. I actually understand blockchain. I wrote about it for a while, but the Kids in the Hall nailed NFTs about 30 years ago when there was a skit they did where you could conceptualize the owning of someone's underwear for $15. You didn't actually own the underwear. You owned the idea of owning the underwear. They actually nailed that. That was in the friggin' 80s. So, yeah.
So that's what an NFT is,
yeah.
Basically. But this is not a crypto show. This is Soccer Today, where we're going to break down some of the results from last night's Major League Soccer slate. We're going to talk about equal pay in U.S. soccer. Finally, U.S. Women's National Team and U.S. Men's National Team will have equal pay. We'll talk about it. We'll look at what it means also. And at the end of the day, if this is the right decision on both ways, we'll decide. We're not going to decide anything. We'll talk about it, though. We'll discuss about it. We'll also, Duane, look at the Europa League Final and this surprising result in penalties. Rangers, oh so close. But no. Difficult day for Rangers fans all across the globe, I should say. But Duane, let's look at some of the results in Major League Soccer. Yesterday, quite an interesting day of results. I guess New York cannot buy a game at home. They cannot buy a win at home this year. Another weird game at Red Bull Arena, 3-3 between the Red Bulls and Chicago. Who knew Chicago could score 3 goals? But they still can't defend to save their lives. But the game that actually caught our attention, which we're not going to dissect wholeheartedly, we'll say, but we'll talk about it a little bit, is Kansas City, Colorado. 4 red cards in this one, all after the 90th minute. Who says soccer is boring? Andrea Fontas and Daniel Shalowi got a red card at the 96th and 99th minute. But before that, at the 91st, Aston Trusty and Lucas Estevez, those are big names. Those are big stars getting red carded in this one. Daniel Shalowi, I guess, got a Gordie Howe hat-trick in a red card, 2 goals, and a couple of good plays. Wow, what a good result for Kansas City. But 4 red cards in this one. What did you think of this weird game between Kansas City and Colorado?
Well, first off, I'm sure we have the Venn diagram shows a few of our listeners that also listen to the Football Ramble, and us as well. This is the second time this week that you would have had a Gordie Howe hat trick referenced on the 2 podcasts.
Wow, and I don't listen to the Football Ramble, so I'm not even aware of that.
Yeah, so you probably wouldn't have guessed that the Football Ramble was the first place you'd hear Gordie Howe hat trick reference, but for sure. What did I think of that game? I was following other things last night, to be honest with you, but then my Twitter feed just kept blowing up with the insanity that was going on, and they're isolating the red cards, the incidents at the end. I mean, it was like the NHL playoffs were happening too, and it's like, we're sure this wasn't a hockey game from 1977. Some of those fouls that were going on, hand to the neck, pushes from behind, whiplashing people. It was pretty ugly.
It was very ugly. You can see some of the stats here. 39% possession for Kansas City, 61% for Colorado. And we'll look at the standings later on. Colorado struggling this season after finishing top of the Western Conference last year. Well, let's face it. Colorado finished top of the Western Conference last year by being top of the Western Conference at only 1 point in the entire season, and that's like the one day after decision day. Like the one time only where it counts. That's what they did this year, struggling out of the gate. But it's not just out of the gate anymore, Duane. We're a third in. This is a third of the season in. You're not struggling. New England, Columbus, Colorado, you ain't just struggling. you're in a deep hole now, and we'll see how teams react to it. I was really happy last night for one thing. Tati Castellanos, my captain in my fantasy, scored a nice Panenka against DC United. New York City 2, DC United 0.
Yeah, look, one thing that we got to get used to is these midweek games, because the schedule is condensed and the depth is going to be challenged for a lot of these teams. So it's really, you want more than almost ever to have those points in the pocket right now. And those teams at the bottom, as you say, you can't be holding up it's early excuse now. It seems early, it feels early because it's still May on the calendar, and it is early for us in terms of the nice weather. We're just getting into it. We have lots of time left to enjoy that. But
That's true.
In terms of an MLS season, we are about 6 weeks ahead of like where we would normally be. So imagine this, like 6 weeks. Imagine the mid-June. We're approaching like Canada Day, July 4th right now in a real MLS schedule, in a real MLS sense. That's how you have to think about this. And if you're way below the red line as a team that was expected to be way above on July 4th, people are going to be talking, and they need to be talking now. I find the New England situation interesting because of how good they were last year, and it tells you how fine of a line it is to be good to like kind of mediocre in this league. That said, the schedule, the standings are pretty tight because no one is really grabbing hold, particularly in the East, and that does allow a way back in for these teams. Montreal was on top of the East going into the game. They're not anymore.
No, but they're not far either. But no, you're right. And it's just fine lines. Let's look at some of the other results that I thought were interesting in MLS last night, as I thought that Houston-Seattle, a win, but another few red cards here in this one. But 1-0 win on the road for Seattle, slowly gathering points they need it because they are below that red line, and they need all the help they can get. San Jose getting a big W, 3-2 for San Jose. Is San Jose restarted? U.S. Open Cup run is going on. They're doing well. Now they just beat Portland. Not bad. Austin, top of the Western Conference, beating LAFC late last night. Another interesting result, but let's start with our big game. The first one we'll break down statistically from last night. CF Montreal, 2 months in the making. The first defeat in over 2 months, all competitions. They haven't lost in Major League Soccer since March 12th, but last night, May 18th, they fell 2-1 to Nashville. Nashville pushing their home unbeaten streak to 23 last night. They have not lost in Nashville in over 2 years. That's a long time. In 2 years, it's a whole lot of things that happened over the last 2 years, but a defeat in Nashville is not one of those things. That's quite impressive. For Nashville, Alex Mule, Hani Mukhtar with 2 goals, 1 goal each here, 2 for Nashville. Kai Kamara scoring is 133rd, tying for 4th best all time last night in Major League Soccer. According to different places, you have different numbers, and we're not going to get started about disparity of numbers, because as a statistician, this is the bane of my existence, and this is one thing that really keeps me from sleeping at night. But Kai Kamara scored. Montreal played well at Spars, finished really well. They could have gotten an equalizer late in this one, but at the end of the day, it wasn't enough, and fell for the first time since March 12th in MLS.
Look, I mean, I look at these numbers, and even if you had erased the score, I would have guessed Nashville had won this game based on my knowledge of how Nashville plays and what I'm seeing here. This is a control game for them. They play the same way at home versus away. That's why they're so successful. If they could find a couple goals, and that efficiency in terms of their shots on target versus shots, it tells you a lot about how they like to play. They don't waste the ball when they have it. They don't worry about having the ball when they don't have it, so long as they're defending. And Montreal have been going pretty well, and they managed to hold them to a limited amount of shots. Less shots on target than they had, despite Montreal having more of the ball, more passes, all those other metrics. It was a typical Nashville game. Nashville is set up to win now. They have to win now. If they don't win now, they're going to start to lose those pieces. We've been over this 100 times before. They will lose some allocation at the end of this year. They're going to have to readjust. They already have made a trade with Alistair Johnson to sort of address that. So this is something that they have to do. But, they have so many road games at the end of the year.
8. They had 8 straight road games.
Yeah.
And they're going to play a whole lot of games at home. And let's look at the standings right now in the Western Conference, because look at Nashville. With this win, they're above the red line and they're now 6th. But they're going to play a ton of game at home. They're going to continue to climb. Nashville will rival Austin LAFC if they can continue. And they're doing this, Duane, without even a big production from Hani Mukhtar. Before last night, he had only 2 goals and 4 assists this year. After last night, it's a bit different. But for Hani Mokhtar, he's starting to get the ball rolling. He was an MVP candidate last year. So far, not the case this year. But if he gets rolling, he can. They're playing well at home, and so slowly but surely, Nashville is going to continue their rise in the Western Conference standings. They're going to be fourth before you know it, because no one's running away with it. And the Galaxy are not impressing anybody. Salt Lake is having a difficult travel Sunday, coming to Montreal to play one of the best teams in the league, even if they lost last night. So I do think Nashville is... If you could a few weeks ago put a wager on Nashville when they were not really playing well and they were on the road to win MLS Cup, you probably got good odds, because you know what, they might be one of the candidates after all.
You look, I'm going to point to Toronto because that's my job on here, is to compare everything to TFC. But TFC in 2016,
it's a center of the universe, right? Anyways,
yeah, well, precisely, yeah. In all things, and I am the center of that universe. I am the king of the world. Anyway, forget the reference there. No, what I'm saying here is this is a relevant reference because TFC built that stadium, or rebuilt that stadium, in 2016. They played the first 7, 8, 9 games on the road, just like Nashville did. They didn't start all that fast in 2016, despite everyone expecting big things from them. Javinko coming off his MVP season. Well, that season ended with TFC in the MLS Cup final because they built and built and built through that summer and became better and better and better. And they ultimately won the championship, of course, a year later. That's what Nashville's got to look at. They've got to take advantage of these home games, get a momentum rolling forward, because this is a league that's all about rolling into the final weeks of the season in the right form. We saw it last year with New England. They were doing fine, but that's, 18-day break killed them. And it's all about momentum in this league. And that's I hate saying that because I'm a guy that prefers the hard numbers and the data more, but you can't ignore the narrative reality stuff that's out there too, because year after year after year, we talked about this in the playoffs last year, how the bye teams got killed in this. So in some ways, Nashville might be best set up of anyone because they have so much of a home schedule in the bottom end. And that new stadium is going to have that new stadium bump, that new stadium excitement. The crowd that has a good team to get behind and to cheer for.
It's pretty loud. I haven't worked the game, and hearing the DIS, so the interior sound, it was really loud in Nashville last night. Even all the way from here, I can tell you that the atmosphere was bumping, and the fans are responding at Geodis Park, which, by the way, is a logistic company from France. If you don't know Geodis, they do logistics, which is not clear thinking. That's logics. That's different. Logistics is basically planning, moving of things, and making sure it arrives at times in the right delays.
Yeah, and well, Nashville is. I haven't been there in several years now, and by several I mean like I was a very young person when I was there. Yeah, like I had hair, and I was like early 20s the last time I was there. But it was a pretty hopping town then, and by all accounts, it has become a party central since then. So I suspect that the crowd is quite refreshed and loud and ready to go when game kicks off there.
Yes, and by refreshed, he means drunk. And that's also great. Let's continue our statistical dive as we now will move on to our next, our next game that we're going to break down statistically speaking. And we're talking about Vancouver because Vancouver played last night. It was a fun match and a win for the Vancouver Whitecaps at home 2-1. A win signed Lucas Cavallini and Brian White. Brian White tying the game at the 71st minute after making its way onto the pitch later into this one. Did not start the game, was used as a sub and was able to get his tying goal for this one. Lucas Cavallini scored the game winner at the 92nd minute, 90+2. A typical Whitecaps at home type of game where they didn't want the ball. They gave the ball to FC Dallas. 42% possession for Vancouver, a very low 344 passes with a, okay 75% passing accuracy. Very low amount of corners and a typical amount of fouls in Major League Soccer. Around 15 is what you expect in a normal game. Vancouver not being the type of team that will disrupt the run of play too much. That's not their end goal. Their end goal is to pounce on the small opportunities they'll get, but they don't want to create too many yellow cards opportunities. So we're seeing Vancouver getting a late goal, late reward. But those numbers and the way it happens, it's not telling me that this is something that is going to happen every single week. Dare I say, Duane, that I don't think this win against Dallas is a replicable result for Vancouver? Is it me just piling on the Whitecaps? A little bit, but that's what the data is telling me.
Well, look, the positive, of course, is the 3 points. That's the biggest number here that you have to focus on. The points are in the pocket, but you're right. It doesn't. There's a lot going on in Whitecaps land. We beat them up all the time. Another positive in this game is that Brian White did get a goal. It's only his second of the year, which we hate to say we told you so, but actually we don't, because we tell you so all the time. He's just performing at his career numbers again, and that's something that they should have planned for, and hopefully can adjust in the summer. Cavallini seems to be coming on a little bit more right now, so that's maybe something that they can hang a hat on. But they dug themselves a bit of a hole to start the year that they're going to have to get out of it, and that's going to be tough for them. But it's a nice win for them midweek, and they need all the good positive vibes that they can get going out of there, and hopefully they can build upon that. As I said, Brian White getting his first goal off his foot this year.
Yeah, that's
previous goals off the head, but anyway. So there you go.
But Vancouver is still dead last in the league, tied with Chicago with only 11 points. Also is Toronto in the wooden spoon position as of right now. But all things in perspective, we'll see how that evolves over the next few weeks. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about equal pay in U.S. soccer and the Europa League Final right here on Soccer Today.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Kev Larme here, joined by Duane Rollins in a second. If you like what we do and you like to support us financially and benefit from something we're going to start again very soon, Duane and I talk about, of course, Canadian soccer in a very specific way. Please subscribe to our specific Patreon page at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. Over the next few weeks, you'll start to see changing of a few things on our Patreon page, and we're gearing up to Qatar, and we'll see what the beautiful game will bring us during the rest of the year. For the first time in history, the beautiful game bringing equal pay in U.S. soccer. Duane, it was announced yesterday that U.S. soccer, U.S. men's national team, and U.S. women's national team have all agreed in a brand new collective bargaining agreement that does also include equal pay. Landmark labor agreements with members of the men's and women's national team will include higher paychecks and shared World Cup prize money. Here's a next excerpt from Andrew Doss's article on the New York Times, a great writer that you can follow, of course, on the New York Times, and I suggest you do. One of the best writers in soccer in the entire North America and entire world. So one of the parts of his article goes as this: as the women's soccer stars stared at their laptop screens Monday night and the new labor deal was explained to them, the numbers just kept climbing. A few $1,000s here, tens of thousands of dollars there. Pretty soon the figures had crossed into the millions. What they added up to, the players all knew, was something many of them had chased for most of their careers: equal pay. That reality arrived Wednesday in landmark contracts with the U.S. Soccer Federation that will guarantee, for the first time, that U.S. soccer players representing U.S. men's and women's national team will receive the same pay when competing in international matches and competition. You can read the rest of the article, of course, on the New York Times website. I don't even know if they publish paper anymore, but that's not the big problem here. It's not a problem. The great thing is that the paper will be equally shared. That paper making that money on both sides of the equation for the first time in U.S. soccer history.
I believe you can walk down to a newsstand and pick up a New York Times if you're so inclined. You want to old school it up. But I just give them $10 a month and read it online myself. As you should you. It's that in the Post, your local paper, support local journalism. It matters. That's my J school talk there. No, in terms of, this is a topic that we've been talking about on this show, and I've done national hits on it. I've been on the CBC talking about this. I've been on radio all over the country talking about this at various times over the past 5-10 years even. It's something that that never seems to end. And this is really a landmark sort of choice that has been made. And look, I think everyone involved in this has to take some credit. The women obviously have fought for this for a long time, and even though I think we have expressed not a disagreement with the concept, but maybe some issues with some of the fine print in the past, it's never been because we didn't believe that they didn't deserve equal pay. I think the men deserve some credit here too because they have, realized the importance of this from a grander perspective and they could have dug their heels in and could have said no, that they weren't going to share their prize money, but they chose to be bigger and to not do that because honestly, it's not the U.S. or the U.S. men's fault that FIFA pays out more on the men's side. They have chosen to pool that, and it is really not an equal pooling that's going in, but it will be an equal pooling that's coming out, and that's going to be the most significant increase in these revenues here. The women have sacrificed a little bit in terms of the guaranteed revenue side. There is going to be some provision within this agreement which allows some of the players to be identified to receive some benefits, their health benefits and maternity benefits and things like that they really needed that are kind of unique to the women's game. So they've remained in there, but sort of that guaranteed salaries won't be there in the same way, but they win so much that you can pretty much feel confident that their incomes are going to increase a great deal. And now if you're a U.S. fan of either one of these programs, I think that one of the great things that really came out of this is now, like the U.S. used to have that slogan, like one nation, or was it one nation, one team? Or I think it was something like that. The concept being that they were all together, whether they were youth, whether they were men, and a lot of the women's fans would push back against that. Well, they really are now. Because the men's success is the women's success now. If the men were to go to the quarterfinals of the World Cup, that's more money for the women. And vice versa. If the women win a World Cup, that's more money for the men. So they really do have to pull together, and they really do have to work together to build the system overall. And it is a blueprint that I think a lot of countries in the world should look to, particularly on not every country in the world will have the resources that the United States has to pay out the bonuses in the same way. That's understood. But every country in the world gets paid out at the World Cup in the same way. So there's no reason why other countries can't look at this and decide that they're going to pool all prize money together within a quadrennial and split it up accordingly, or within a year and split it up accordingly. That's something the rest of the world can look and do.
And it's interesting to see now that Canada will be qualifying and will be participating in the Qatar World Cup, where Canada lies into this dichotomy because Canada does not have equal pay on the women's side. Canada is very different in how it is built behind the scenes. So is it the sign that Canada should follow suit, Duane?
Yeah, it's very difficult to really pinpoint what the pay split is. It depends on the year. I have seen very limited, because Canada Soccer doesn't release its budgets. They're not publicly available, which is a whole other conversation whether or not, because it should be, but nonetheless, they aren't. It's difficult to see this. I have had conversations with people behind the scenes about this. I can say that from my talking to them, I do think that they are committed to fairness. When it comes to actual funding, what they will always reiterate and underline is that they have 1/10 of the funding of the United States. So it is difficult to match their numbers, which makes everything glaring. But again, I go back to the prize money situation. And when, this money comes in for Canada qualifying, that money should be spread out. Now, should it be spread 50-50 between the men and women and senior international elite level? That's something that some people in the CSA will push back on and say, well, no, because we also have to fund grassroots, and we also have to fund infrastructure improvements, and we also have to fund referee improvements. That's what they'll say. So I don't know whether it's going to be a 50-50 split, but I do think that there is an argument to be made that prize money should maybe come away from the professional men's athletes that are, particularly if they make above a certain threshold. That's kind of how I'd look at that. Like, does Alphonso Davies need his World Cup bonus? I mean, obviously we will love Alphonso, but does he need it?
What need, and does he deserve it? Yes. Does he need it? What does everybody really need in life? That's also something that is hard to say.
Which is what the men, sorry to interject, I think that's what the men in the U.S. have probably said. He's like, well, we make millions. Like most of us, like Christian Pulisic makes millions. So he can it's easy for him to step aside and go, okay, yes, I can give up a $50,000 check, whereas a $50,000 check is life-changing for some people in the women's program. And that's a fair thing and a way to look at it.
Sure. But it's also interesting to see that, because maybe one day it'd be the other way around. Who knows? And then things hopefully say the same too, in a way that the important thing is that success is, yes, celebrated, but it's not just about success. And you mentioned the guarantees that are, hopefully at the end of the day, doesn't mean that people make less too, right? Because if you take out some guarantees and then you start to not be as good and the women's game is changing in a way that other countries are better, maybe it's going to be harder to win World Cups. At the end of the day, equal pay will be the same, but everyone's going to make a little less, unfortunately, if those guarantees are not there anymore. So that's also maybe the one thing in that CBA that is not talked about enough is hopefully they can continue the great success, because if so, everything will be great. If not, well, we'll talk about it if that gets there.
Yeah, which is always what people said. And look, if you listen carefully, in fairness, most people did. We didn't get a lot of pushback on our positions on this in the past when we weren't as just like rah about it. What we always said is that it was very difficult to have this conversation in a rational way because the women were paid differently. They were paid differently than the men. They had guaranteed salary, the men did not. It was all bonus to the men. So the women's bonuses were smaller than the men's, but the men's didn't have any guaranteed salary because they had a guaranteed salary as a club team. That's a societal issue, not a USSF issue, which complicated and muddied the waters. However, they put all that aside and they put their heads together. They sat down at a table. They stopped arguing in the press and they got it done. And to that, I tip my hat. That's something that's very difficult to do in this day and age and wasn't happening until about 6, 7, 8 months ago. And thankfully, it's done now. There's other issues in there too. Quickly, I mean, I think in many ways we are the preeminent podcast that talks about field turf over the past 5 years. I would say that we could make that argument.
I know the difference by brand. You tell me field turf, you tell me AstroTurf. I know those are not just names; those are brand. I know what they mean too. Exactly. Yeah. I know way too much about plastic grass.
Yeah, we could probably have had at one point in this history of the show, we could have had a separate show only on synthetic surfaces. It's not called the synthetic surface clause, but there certainly is a clause in there that kind of gives the women more control over what venues they play at, and that will include the playing surfaces they play at. Like there's an equal quality of playing surfaces, which gets into subjective stuff. I'm not going to get into it now. If you want to go back in our archives, you can hear all that stuff. But I do think there's other important things there. When they're playing a home game, like they'll play the women and send the women all over the place to play 10 friendlies in 12 days or something like that because they can make money off it. There's other issues there that they have more control over what they're doing and what their bodies are. And there's also an alignment with the schedule because the women's club game is starting to increase in importance. And this is something that's really going to affect all countries as well. It's going to affect the Canadian program too, because it used to be that you could just randomly call these women in for like month-long camps in the middle of their club seasons. And because they weren't making any money in their clubs or very little money in their clubs, they just come. But now that they can't do that anymore.
Which is fair. And that's what also it's been all about, is for fairness across the board. Before we say goodbye for today, let's talk about the Europa League. Yesterday, a trophy was raised after penalties, and Frankfurt was able to get the W, the big win, the surprise win. Eintracht Frankfurt is your Europa League winner and will go into the Champions League next season. Quite a surprising result, but Frankfurt deserve it. They won the Europa League. They'll be in the Champions League. Even if it took penalties, the skill competition, they still made it there, and you got to make your goals. We'll spare some thoughts for all the different players involved that missed their penalties and might be wishing that they were maybe playing somewhere else real soon. But Duane, what do you think about this Europa League final?
Yeah, Aaron Ramsey missed the penalty. Tried to go up the middle. It was a nice save. I thought it was better save than worst take, but it was Aaron Ramsey.
I saw a meme, sorry to interrupt you, Duane, that says, when you're trying to forget your pass and your inner Arsenal comes back running and you miss a penalty. So that's what Aaron Ramsey was living. His best life, still not able to win a trophy.
One of the better stats that went out there is, forgive me because I retweeted at the time, so go back through my archives to get the actual credit. But there was a journalist that was on the analytics side that posted the stats of players' penalty record that were subbed in specifically to take the penalty, which is, of course, a bit of a subjective measure because you don't know precisely what the motivation is, but you can sort of assume if a player's subbed in late in extra time of a penalty shootout kind of game that they're coming in for that. Look. It's not very good. So basically the message is don't put a player in cold to shoot a penalty, even if he's a good penalty shooter, because there's very little evidence that they're going to make it, or it's 50-50 at the very best, which is much worse than the 75% that you would expect in a normal penalty. It was a well-taken penalty shootout by Frankfurt. You said it's a surprise. It is a surprise that Frankfurt is the Europa League champions based on the overall tournament. It's not a surprise that they beat Rangers on the day. I thought it was a pretty evenly played game. Rangers got the first goal. Frankfurt with a nice way to push back. awesome atmosphere in there. Both sides, both fans did it well. I haven't heard of any trouble that happened there, so hopefully that stays the same.
Yeah.
But there was some worry about that. And I love the Europa League. When it gets late, it's great to see, those clubs yesterday. You had a club that has one that hadn't had a European Cup since I think the 70s in Rangers, and one that hadn't had one since about the same time.
Yeah.
So it was straight for its first trophy in 40 years in the European side, and that's amazing to see the excitement around that. And as you say, they're in the Champions League. Not only in the Champions League, they're straight to the group stage in pot one.
Yeah.
So they can get it, and Villarreal was the team that did that last year, and look how far they got.
Yeah, they made it to the final, right? To the semifinals. Yeah, semifinals.
Yeah.
But that's quite an accomplishment for Frankfurt, and we'll see what they do next year in the Champions League. But until then, if you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we'll invite you to click on that subscribe button and subscribe to our show, and click on that notification bell so you're made aware of whenever we post a brand new podcast that you can find everywhere you find your favorite podcast. Podcasts like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts. Also, you can subscribe to our show, patreon.com/sports podcasting network. And if you're looking for advertising opportunities, you can contact me at sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com. For Duane Rollins, I'm Kev Larme. Until tomorrow for our weekend preview show, I wish you a great soccer.